The Villa di Mazere, built by the architect Andrea Palladio at Mazere in Venetia. To be as beautiful as a human body, the building has to be strictly symmetrical. At Mazere, the centre of symmetry is an imposing forepart, the main house mostly taken up with reception rooms. Thrusting forward, it proclaims the nobility of the edifice while at the same time providing the owners with an advanced observation post for surveying their land. The facade of the main house with its pediment and Ionic columns imitates a temple of antiquity. Antiquity was the model to adopt, the architectural school of the Renaissance. Like his contemporaries, Palladio fed his architectural appetite on the romantic Roman ruins that he drew and measured and whose secrets he tried to discover. But Palladio was the first to take the facade of a Roman temple and stick it onto a simple dwelling, thus inaugurating a Western architectural tradition of decorative facing that lasted up to the start of the 20th century. What was structural in antique architecture here became no more than a sign to enhance the principal facade of the building, to mark the architectural grandeur of the work and the identity of the owner whose arms were displayed on the pediment. The two wings spreading to the rear of each side of the main house and intended for living and working in are treated with a simplicity suitable to their more prosaic and intimate character. They each have a wide loggia, an arcaded covered passage that Palladio deemed indispensable to a villa, where the master of the house could go anywhere and oversee everything without being troubled by the weather. But the rhythm of these arcades, reminiscent of grand Roman civil architecture, also make it possible to unify the appearance of two quite distinct buildings. Bracketing the main house are the dwellings. Pushed to the rear are the working areas, barn, stables and wine press, to keep away the pollution of dust and smell. The organization of living space follows the same common-sense rules that Palladio applied to all his villas. On the ground floor, the domestic quarters, kitchens, outbuildings, servants' lodgings and cellars. On the first floor, the apartments. The facade faces due south, but the arcades protect the living quarters from the sun, at the same time creating a further withdrawal, a stone curtain making a visual transition from the outside to the inside. As with the symmetry, the strict alignment of the openings, until then a rarity in private houses, became a rule for good architecture with Palladio. He said you must always put solid above solid and space above space. In the Villa di Mazere, windows and doors are in strict alignment, except for those at the extremities used for agricultural purposes. Curiously, this part, the least noble, is also the most highly decorated. This is contrary to Palladio's principle that decoration ought to be in accordance with function. But the columns of the arcades in this part of the building are twice as wide as those in the inhabited part. Doubtless the architect sought to attenuate this disparity by hollowing out the columns with niches housing statues to make them seem narrower. Their width is explained by the load they bear, a pediment worthy of the facade of a church, concealing the pigeon lofts necessary for rapid communications with Venice. A wish to dissimulate an over-trivial detail, to give the farm the look of a palazzo, perhaps also to balance the composition by strengthening the set of the wings in comparison with the forepart. The design of the facade gives the impression that the main house is divided into two more or less equal stories. In fact, the ground floor apartment, as designed by the architect, had an astonishingly low ceiling, while the ceremonial reception rooms on the first floor are high enough for a palace. They are destined, said Palladio, for all sorts of ceremony, theatre, wedding receptions, and other similar pastimes. 4 smaller rooms set at the 4 corners make this room cruciform. The cross-shaped room opens to another room behind that is even more extraordinary in volume and decoration, the Salon of Olympus, defining the size and proportions of the rooms. The proportions of the most beautiful and the most elegant rooms that are also the most successful can be designed in 7 ways. In the apartments of the Villa de Mazères, Palladio simply alternates square rooms with rooms half the square, in a relationship of a half. While for the cruciform room, the relationship is based on 1/3. The term might seem badly chosen to describe these little country palazzi, but the marble columns and the dressed ashlars of the facades are not merely moulded stucco, for here everything is in brick, from the walls to the pedestals of the statues. That is true for all the Pelagian villas. Despite their grandiose air, they are economically built. There is the same pragmatic attitude regarding the organization of the access points and flows of circulation. In contrast to usage, there is no grand entrance, nor any monumental staircase in front. Access to the noble areas of the main house is from the side by 2 sets of stairs, made all the more modest since the architect introduced a passage to connect the 2 loggias. This is a real transit area where noble and utilitarian paths cross. But Palladio also made it possible for his clients to gain access to their apartments by another way, 2 private entrances by 2 staircases rising from the communal areas. These entrances are the only rooms on the ground floor to have painted decorations on the walls. This management of the entry, however discreet it may be, produces a spectacular effect. The visitor goes without any transition from the economic and sober loggias to the ceremonial splendour of the first floor, from the farmyard to a palatial room in which are discovered the most extraordinary collection of Italian Renaissance frescoes. The Villa de Mazères keeps a final surprise for the visitor. Taking advantage of the difference in level, the architect put an enclosed courtyard at the rear of the villa on the same level as the whole of the first floor. Completely invisible from the outside, there is a water feature using the spring that was the original reason for the choice of the site. Once again, this is a borrowing from antiquity. In Greece and Rome it was known as a nympheum, a sanctuary for nymphs. This monumental fountain, built around an artificial grotto, is both a place of cult and of relaxation. To the fountain with its statues by the great Venetian sculptor Vittoria, Palladio contrasted a rear facade that is remarkable for its sobriety, no doubt seeking to rediscover the atmosphere of the inner courtyards of Roman villas. But he exercised the greatest skill in using the difference in levels of the villa to make the whole of the first floor a link between 2 worlds, a striking foreshortening between the private area of the nympheum and the public face, monumental and imposing, of the villa of the masters of Mazères. Fountains follow each other in front of the villa to end at the other side of the road, making the symbolic path of the spring coincide with the symmetrical axis of the building. But this is more than a game. These fountains are the spectacular part of a complex of conduits leading from a large basin built into the hillside for irrigating the gardens and fields. Palladio may not have said a word about Veronese's frescoes, but he proudly described this hydraulic system that combined culture with nature. A fountain was hollowed in the rock in front of the dwelling and highly ornamented with stucco and paint. This fountain forms a small lake that serves as a fish pond, from which water flows into the kitchen and then into the gardens on either side of the main road that slopes gradually up to the house. There are 2 reservoirs or little ponds that also provide a watering place on the main road. Then further on they water the extensive orchards full of excellent fruit trees and all sorts of vegetables. The farm is still a farm, but the work is now done in a separate building, built at the start of the 20th century on the other side of the road. Palladio's overall project remains in the architecture. It's not easy to see. The image is blurred by all the columns, all those pediments that for so long disguised the most ordinary buildings as ancient temples. It's partly his bequest to posterity, and also that is where he was the most innovative. To state that a simple country house deserves an architecture worthy of a monument, or a temple, was to say for the first time that architecture must also consider habitation and daily usage in trying to marry beauty with utility, as Palladio put it, or between form and function, as we say nowadays.